Let's bring in Raymond Tanter. He teaches international relations at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He also served as personal representative to the Secretary of Defense for arms control talks in Europe in the Reagan and Bush administrations. Professor Tanter joining us from our Washington bureau. Sir, welcome to Bottom Line. Thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Sir, does the Russian proposal to have Syria turn its chemical weapons over to international inspectors have the potential, as President Obama said last night, to remove the threat of chemical weapons without the use of force? Well,
if you have to look at the Russian pattern in the past, before the first Gulf War, the Russians came up with a proposal, a peace proposal. Before the second Gulf War, the Russians did the same thing. So I consider this more of a gambit, a ploy by the Russians to slow down the momentum and build a coalition within the American Congress and within the European Union against the American initiative. So I think President Obama is a bit too hasty in jumping on this particular bandwagon. Yeah. But hey, the market likes it very much, it seems.
Very much so. Well, Secretary of State Kerry, he meets in Geneva on Thursday and on Friday with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. How can they find common ground when the relationship between Washington and Moscow can best be described as cold at the moment?
Well, yes, cool. The Cold War is over, but Russia is asserting itself. But, hey, you know, Putin could be in trouble on this. If he doesn't deliver within a reasonable time his ally Assad, then Putin has gone overboard and he will lose prestige in Europe. And that's very important to Vladimir.
Well, who has the most to lose here, Washington or Moscow?
Well, both have a lot to lose. President Obama dug himself in a hole, and all of a sudden Putin has dug himself in a hole. The two men are in a hole, and you know what you do in a hole? You stop digging to get out of it.
Well, why has the president, do you think, struggled to build a coalition against a regime that the United States has clearly violated international law and in so doing committed atrocities against innocent men, women, and children by using chemical weapons?
Well, President Obama was looking for a way out of the hole in which he dug himself, and President Putin thought this was a way that he could assert himself back into the scheme of things as a major power, as a great power. And I think that what one has to do is to look at the Syrian rebels and try to find out if there are any moderates. And I had assumed that there were moderates in the Syrian rebel community, but then I discovered that they weren't. The Free Syrian Army Chief of Staff is very much anti-Israel in the sense that Israel is the major threat against the world and the like. But the other Syrian moderates say, the other Syrian rebels say he had to say this. So it's hard to find out what the truth is on this. But if you look at the Iranian dissidents, there's a clear case where President Obama can achieve both moral objectives and strategic interests. And you don't find that with respect to the Syrian rebels. And the major difference, I'll just finish this last point, the major difference is that the Iranian dissidents, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, the National Council of Resistance for Iran, are anti-Islamist, whereas the rebels in Syria have Islamists built into their coalition.
Sir, as the violence continues in Syria, a humanitarian crisis on a massive scale is playing out. There's an estimated 6 million people, nearly a third of the country's population. They fled their homes. As the crisis abates in Syria, these citizens are going to need to be repatriated. Is that a job for the international community? And what happens next? What about repairing Syria's infrastructure?
Well, I think you're rather optimistic, thinking that the crisis will abate. The conventional war is the arena in which almost 90-some-odd% of the 100,000 have been killed. Only about 2% have been killed through non-conventional means like chemical warfare. So I think that crisis, in fact, will escalate in Syria well before it begins to de-escalate.